Meanwhile, identity politics, though, is getting crazier and crazier because who does dare stand up against it and then risk getting cancelled? And so you get the ABC's Play School. The children watching Play School might have been a little puzzled to hear this from a member of the Australian Chamber Orchestra playing on the show and being so woke about transgender issues, you know, like mum might actually be a dad and vice versa.
The Play School toys are feeling a little bit tired, so we thought that we might play them a lullaby by Brahms to help them go off to sleep. Brahms was a composer who had a big beard. Does your dad or mum have a big beard?
Joining me is Mark Latham, former federal leader of the Labor Party, now One Nation leader in the New South Wales Parliament. Mark, maybe he was telling a joke. I don't think so. I suspect, is that the ABC being inclusive to toddlers whose mother might actually be a former man with a beard, or is there something else?
Well, it's pretty weird. You know, when you think of Brahms, you think of great music, of course. Not necessarily that he had a long beard, but what is the message here? Is it aimed at children who've had two dads and then one of the dads flips over to identify as a mum and keeps the beard? Having raised a couple of toddlers myself, I think the first reaction is the kids go running off, mummy can have a beard, mummy can have a beard. So it adds to the weirdness of what's going on here. You know, kids take an interest in touching the roughage on your face, and they work out dads have it and mums don't. So it's all very strange. But, you know, I suppose the worrying side of it is a tendency. I've been doing some research recently about professional development teacher training programs in New South Wales, and there's no doubt, Andrew, there's an ideology out there in leftist view that all parts of life are consumed by politics, that giving these messages to little kids, sexualising, normalising certain sexual and gender patterns is just what they do. And they try to convince themselves, these wackos, that somehow sexualising little kids and normalising transgender and the like, you know, kids who haven't got a sexual instinct or inclination in their life until they get to puberty, somehow this is doing some good in high schools, that a transgender 15-year-old won't suicide because of that message on Play School. There's no evidence, there's no connection, there's no logic for that. You know, you and I, over many years now, have spoken about problems like political correctness, identity politics on the left. But one of their worst sicknesses is that they think every single part of life needs to have a political message, a political content.
Yep.
And, you know, that's kind of weird what happened on Play School, but it's indicative of a broader problem.
Well, just speaking of that, I mean, Nick Cave, is he right? The cancel culture, this whole political correctness really is killing creativity and, as he puts it, the unhappiest religion in the world, you know, all the moral self-certainty and self-righteousness, but no pity, no mercy, no redemption.
And no capacity to learn. I think the worst thing about cancel culture is the anti-intellectual aspect of it. You know, what's a guaranteed way in life of never learning anything new, never advancing your intellectual skills and understanding of, you know, what is a very complex, interesting world? Well, just talk to people who agree with you, who share your worldview, that you just get reinforcement of what you believe in. If you want to have no learning in your life, do that, which is essentially cancel culture. But whether we like it or not, feeling uncomfortable intellectually is part of the learning process. You either get to test your own skills, your own argument,
Mark,
or you learn something from someone else who disagrees.
Someone leads you to something that you'd never considered before. You feel threatened by it sometimes. That's true. But how liberating to actually test your ideas and sometimes learn that you've got something to learn. I just think, why would you... This cancel culture, I think, is a sickness. Mark, but talking about identity politics, there's something really that has been struck me really forcibly since... it's the way that the media, many in the media are referring to Kamala Harris, who's the Democrat presidential candidate, Joe Biden's pick as a running mate. You know, you've got the ABC calling her, for instance, and I've heard also here, so, you know, calling her the first black woman to be nominated as a vice presidential candidate, and says that by picking her, Biden is reaching out to young black Americans. Now, the first black woman to be... Mark, it is true that her father is black, but he is from Jamaica and is a college professor. But he left the family, and Harris was actually raised by her mother, a senior academic herself, born in India. She's actually more Indian by upbringing, by culture, one would assume from all that, than black. And her father, in fact, was not born African American. So why are journalists so sure that she speaks to and for African Americans? She's black and properly described as black and exclusively as black rather than Indian.
Oh, well, Andrew, it's misogyny, isn't it, to wipe the important role of the mother in raising the new vice presidential nominee? Normally, they'd pay homage to the mother who's raised the daughter, who's gone on to be a Californian senator and is quite an impressive political performer. I don't agree with a lot of what she says, but she'll take the fight up to Trump, no doubt about that. But, you know, at its core, Andrew, identity politics, subdividing our society on the basis of race, gender and sexuality, is all about denying individuality. Kamala Harris in this circumstance has no individuality as a person who is culturally Indian, having been raised by an Indian woman. She's lumped in because of her skin colour. This is what's so primitive about it. Who judges people by their skin colour? But she's lumped in with anyone who's got a colour darker than white and described as, you know, a black American voter appealing candidate. Now, that's what is totally wrong about this. I'd rather dig into her background and understand what she's done there with her Indian heritage. Indians work very hard. In our country, we know they do great things in the education system, small business and the like. I think that's much more significant. So, you know, the sadness and indeed the sickness of identity politics is to deny the individuality of a woman here who is their flag bearer. And, you know, it's anti-intellectual and primitive.
No, I think there's also another reason here from just what you just said. I think by describing her as black, it paints her as more of the oppressed rather than if you paint her as, say, she's Indian, because Americans of Indian background have a median income of $117,000, way more than whites, $66,000, and nearly triple the median income of African Americans. So that means that if she's described as Indian rather than black, then she doesn't fit that narrative of white oppressors and institutional racism.
Yeah, that's true. The Indian work ethic has carried a lot of that community a long, long way and financially doing great. That's a wonderful thing. But, you know, it hasn't got quite the same ring to it, has it? The first vice presidential candidate of an Indian cultural background. That's not the nature of identity politics. You've got to be lumped into the hole, Andrew. You've got to lump into that particular peg hole where it fits the narrative that they're wanting to spin. So it's not fair to Kamala Harris. It's not fair to other people in the United States, indeed around the world, of an Indian cultural background, because they've been wiped, their individuality denied. And, you know, the primitive nature of this, really judging this. You look at someone, I mean, didn't this go out in the Middle Ages, that we judge people just by how they look?
Well, apparently the answer to that, apparently, Mark, is yes. But there you go. Mark Latham, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.